Hi, everyone here. Welcome to the third talk of the day. We are having here Dennis, also called Jaromil, and he's develops free and open software, source software since the late 90s, and he's also leading the think and do tank called Dyne.org, where also Amir Taaki and Rachel Rose, Ivan Parasit, and all of them are part of the team in there. And so he's here to give his presentation for the Cryptocastle Symposium. So I'm just going to leave the stage for him. And welcome, and thank you for coming.
Thanks. Many thanks. Thanks for hosting me here. It's been fabulous, really. Last 2 days, we had a lot of fun. So I'm doing my best to entertain you for these 50 minutes with a presentation that follows the last one that I gave in a Bitcoin conference. Believe it or not, I don't really go around a lot in Bitcoin conferences because I believe in community, and communities should leave space to more speakers. So the last time I spoke and shared some opinions was 9 years ago at the second Bitcoin conference in London. In this one, I will recap what I said, some things that I said back then. I was motivated by Amir telling me, like, you should really come here because some things you said back then, we weren't all agreeing, but they turned out to be true. This is not about finance at all. I'm not a financial advisor and I don't know anything about finance. It's mostly about social dynamics and what really happens in the social economy around Bitcoin and the community. So, first, a few words where we come from. Dyne.org is, let's say, the embodiment of an older community, mostly based in Sicily, back in '94, and the typical types you can imagine: ham radio amateurs and BBS. I had a point on a BBS back then. So we have one gift. We are very intergenerational, which is a great dimension for diversity in a community. So we have members that are over 70 and members that are below 19. These are our values. The timeline, very briefly put, in 2005 we became a foundation incorporated in the Netherlands, where I live, in Amsterdam. And in 2012 we started working for the European Commission. That was the first grant that we got on research in cryptography and blockchain. The values that we have, like non-profit software house, so we are a software house. We are not giving services, we produce software, and we don't do it for a profit. So that is not a metric, that is not a motivation for us to develop software. Our motivation is impact, social impact, and empowerment. So sustainable goal, we like to recycle technology, so we use existing hardware rather than requiring new hardware. So back then, Dyne.org became very popular for Dynabolic, a GNU Linux distribution that I released that was able to run on Xbox game consoles, the Xbox One, without a mod, which made very popular the first software that we released because many people had game consoles and they wanted to do more with them. So we also support very much the ethos behind the initiatives for freedom of modding your own hardware, no strings attached, which should be a market law always respected. Simplicity, minimalism, unique principles, I'll talk a little bit more about. They are our driving principles, so we don't like to build monolithic stuff, we like to plug into existing things, and we are associated to the Free Software Foundation here in Europe, and we have good ties with the US one. Of course, with such a pedigree, we couldn't miss the worldwide sensation. So some of us got involved in Bitcoin in the early days, and here I just put up 3 logos. Maybe some of you remember the one on the right. It was a logo proposition that did not make it, and it represents an alpaca. It hints about the roots of Bitcoin, and I will go through a brief historical overview. Because someone back on the Bitcoin Talk forum once bought alpaca socks with Bitcoins, and they became a complete meme because, they are very, very comfortable. I wear wool socks all the time. They are super, especially hand knitted, they are fantastic. So Basically, this became a complete meme in the community, and alpaca became a symbol, a proposed symbol for Bitcoin. Hints about the ethos of this community as well. It's a community that always valued do-it-yourself, quality of materials, and some sort of specialty in comfort and quality, well, let's say, and warm feet. Yeah, and then Dogecoin, which became famous. I put it on this slide before Musk discovered it. I mean, I think it tells a lot about the lulz behind all this movement, so more about it. One aspect of the phenomenon that we saw as Bitcoin, I think that really took a grip on our communities, is the king is naked fable. So what Bitcoin really made, and I believe it became so popular, I described it back then in London, is showing that the king, the emperor, clothes, the fable in English, the king was naked, really. So it did not really create something that most of the people in the sector of IT and finance did not know. We all knew that there was something to be radically changed in the way banks handled money. In the digital age, banks basically started handling money as a database, and we know that is not sustainable. So it was also a revolution in trust architecture, but most importantly, really for everyone was like, okay, see the emperor clothes, like we all knew it. And when the emperor became naked, what he did, thanks to Satoshi Nakamoto mostly, perhaps also for his own interest to not expose too much himself on a big gig like Bitcoin, it left the empty throne. It's a sigil in Magic the Gathering, which we all loved back then, but it's also topos in anthropology and Greek and Roman history. Toimasia tu tronu is the ancient Greek pronunciation of it, which means the empty power, which is also the potence of power. It doesn't mean that there is no king. It means that everyone could be sitting on that throne. And usually in history, the lack of a king on the throne signified also a period of prosperity and optimism in people. So we had this opportunity to have a project, to have no emperor, no king, and we leave it that way. I don't believe that anyone coming up and saying, I'm Satoshi, it's really ridiculous. We saw some people making themselves ridiculous. And yeah, this is a link to the article if you want to read it. I finish more or less my recap with one more historical point. You can look it up. It's the article that I wrote right after the Bitcoin conference in London to condense a little bit. It's available online. Bitcoin, the End of the Taboo on Money. It's a quote to Bernard Lietaer, who was an economist and a monetary designer in Europe. Unfortunately left us about 2 years ago. He defined the concept of taboo in money. So I'm here also to recall one historical moment, which is a milestone in the history of Bitcoin, and it's often overlooked. Also, Satoshi feared this moment. And this is a timeline that I saved back in 2013 on February. A timeline of the movements, the mining and the volume in Bitcoin. And you see marked some periods. So we had a WikiLeaks financial blockade in 2011, January, sorry. The Forbes article that was portraying Andresen with burning money on the first page was published on 9th of May 2011. The first Bitcoin conference took place in Prague in November 2011. Then there was a Bitcoinica theft of 43,000 Bitcoins back somewhere in between 2011, 2012, and the second Bitcoin conference in London that I joined also in September 2012. then you see the price started up. My argument is that not only Bitcoin benefited WikiLeaks with a channel of donations back then, but that Bitcoin itself was started as an ethos, as a shared ethos, as an urgent need in the community of hackers in the moment in which WikiLeaks was banned from receiving MasterCard and Visa wires for donations. Why? Not because really the hacker movement, and this I like to highlight, was in favor of what WikiLeaks was doing per se, but because this was not a legal process. There was no judgment, there was no court case around the fact that WikiLeaks should have the pipes disconnected when it was receiving donations. This was right after the publication of the helicopter shooting in Baghdad, killing some innocent Reuters journalists. So it was a worldwide sensation and people were donating a lot to WikiLeaks. Cutting the pipes at that momentum was not even ruled by judges. Actually, what we had is CNN and Fox TV with some popular conservative figures in US pointing the finger and saying, burn him, and probably they managed to, as of today we can tell. Back when I did this analysis, Julian was still had some sort of freedom and legal troubles. This was the last message of Satoshi Nakamoto. Thanks for my pal from Bitology to remember me also like this. I actually forgot it. This was the message, and this was the article it was pointing at. Satoshi deleted the link to the article from the Bitcoin Talk forum. It was the first popularizing article of Bitcoin in December 2010 on PC World. And actually the Bitcoin.com and Bitcoin IT websites, the Bitcoin IT is the wiki, had troubles to stay up. We had an enormous amount of traffic. Satoshi was afraid of what was coming. And yeah, he has some reasons. We shouldn't blame him for that. This is the very last message that he wrote on the forum and that we know of. Of course, this was what in philosophy is often called a kairos, a moment of rupture. A moment of rupture in the conjunction of many different events, both the WikiLeaks success and the Bitcoin existence, which was there since quite a while. I remember knowing Bitcoin from the 0.4 release on Slashdot. It led to something a bit bigger. So now I'm following the track of WikiLeaks and I'm trying to understand what is happening in the head of those that look at this from the outside, namely also intelligence communities. This photo that was published by Richard Stallman when he visited Julian Assange is also a milestone picture, because that moved the intelligence communities, in particular the one in the US, to really investigate on the nature of open source movements and communities. We started becoming extremely interesting for the disruptive potential, but also for the criminal potential of these operations. And yeah, Richard just stepped forward and supported this. I know lawyers that helped Richard in his quest that definitely said it was very bad of you to do that, you shouldn't have done that. But it was also a sort of emperor clothes situation. You have to understand that the open source and hacker communities have an ethos that is about transparency, that is about honesty, and that is about also speaking things as they are, not really hiding behind a curtain of politics and of faking and of marketing. Of course, this issue is way bigger than just marketing. And from the eyes of the outside, the intelligence communities, I believe we look a lot like this. And yeah, that may be a wrong interpretation in my opinion, but one thing, one hint that is given by the sort of movements that have crossed the hacking sphere is you can always trace an ethos in the sort of operations that is growing also in the targets, and also the rules. the sort of comedian approach to what is the reality. To have a community, it takes to have irony, it takes to have playfulness, it takes to do ridiculous things together sometimes. So I think that this is a trace, that you see it from inside or from the outside, that there is a community. And I'm expressively calling intelligence communities because we are all communities, and there can be a dialogue in the sense of understanding what are the changes and not just fencing the system from having a change and having a transformation. So ultimately, what we witnessed in this story is that a transformation was needed. And the people to remind us this are increasingly less, unfortunately. In this slide, I give a tribute to Dan Kaminsky, who unfortunately left us in April this year, 2021. He was one of the funny people in Bitcoin, and back in the early days, he inscribed this into the blockchain. You can find it into the early blocks. It's a ASCII tribute to another cypherpunk that left us, Len Sassaman, who was the author of Mixnet. And of course, he put also ASCII Bernanke in there. Funny enough, of the 3 people involved in this tribute, only Bernanke is still alive. So guess who will tell the history of what is really the community behind hackers? And here is my point now. We must be very careful at who tells our story. And I'm not talking about, as a history, a community history. It cannot be told by a marketing gig. It cannot be told by a website. It cannot be told by conferences even. It's an oral process, and then a written process, which is often very violent because it excludes parts of history. So since what we are doing here is not just a technical project, I think it's very important to understand how we keep track of the roots, the history, and the ethos that is transforming the world while it is also transforming Bitcoin and the open source community. Why I make a parallel with the open source community, the reason is that it exists since longer. So I think that certain dynamics that now I step into the future sort of prediction, certain dynamics that we can observe in the progression of the open source communities, we can trace back and we can predict to happen also in Bitcoin as a big open source project. It's almost as big as the Linux kernel, if not bigger perhaps. I mean, the community is sort of different, but like the Linux kernel also started with Linus Torvalds posting a proof of concept on a website, and suddenly became very, very useful for reasons that we all know in the ICT sector. You can run it pretty much on everything. Well, there was NetBSD back then. I mean, there were some other systems, but so the open source community. This is a milestone, a recent milestone. So now I'm stepping into the present and updating a bit this talk. What happened in 2019 was the biggest acquisition that ever has happened in ICT. It's 34 billion. IBM bought Red Hat. Red Hat is the biggest company around the Linux kernel. It's driving most of its development together with other bigger companies, but the difference is that Red Hat is born out of the Linux kernel development and GNU Linux. So this shouldn't go unnoticed when interpreting the history of where we are. This is bigger than any other crypto acquisition you can see around. And it is a milestone that will change the course of open source. And I think it's also a warning, an alarm that we can sort of focus on and try to steer in a way or another the future of Bitcoin as well. What happens now is that all this community attitude is basically dissolving or becoming instrumental to big companies like IBM. Using Linux in the past 4 or 5 years, besides my own distribution that I had to fork to sort of control and control its legacy, using Linux feels pretty much like being a guinea pig today. when you can drive the research and development of the whole community, your company owns the whole castle. Because the research and development is really like the trajectory of the future development of a technology. And yeah, Linux is a community. There is Microsoft, there is nowadays we have Oracle, Google, Facebook. We have many contributors to the Linux, corporate contributors to the Linux kernel. But the fact that now more and more the research and development is driven by a conglomerate of corporate interests makes the community sort of disappear. The role of community is not only that of using Linux for free, gratis, but also that of using Linux in your own company. I'm sure that everyone running operations here has machines with the Linux kernel running. And when someone changes the standard or something, like if you have a big company, 40 employees, you have to retrain everyone to this new thing that someone else decided, not on your schedule, not on your priorities. So we are actually forced into a certain way of adapting our smaller company, SMEs, to constantly update to what someone else decides. And then eventually our hope is sell it because I'm exhausted. I mean, can I keep up with this? But I remember informatics not being like that. I remember we had actually adopted BSD and Linux because we believed we could control everything in it. So this is the radical change that we are seeing right now into open source. And I believe it can be a dangerous drive also for Bitcoin. What I admire in Bitcoin is the mechanism of BIPs, for instance, of sort of democratic decision. It's what I would call algorithmic sovereignty. So there is an interaction between stakeholders on the new improvements that are adapted, and there is big attention to retrofitting the system. Then we have a constellation of other projects which predictable could be born that either peg on layer 0 blockchains or do their own, and they are more experimental. So this is one thing that I would like to warn our community is be careful with that X, Eugene. Be careful with your experiments, because what people want when they use your product is stability, is something that still runs 10 years after. And this is also the promise of the blockchain. I mean, with marketing names like Infinity and Eternity, you need to make sure that you walk the walk. So it's tricky, it's dangerous, and we are moving on moving grounds. And a fork can generate quite a turmoil, quite an earthquake. What are the solutions to this also? Not only stability. In general, I would like now in this part of the talk propose you some general patterns of design that I think are good to adopt. And then, well, in your decision making or priority making, and then also show you a little solution that I work in the past 4 years as my own shot at something blockchainy. So one thing is minimalism. I believe it's very important to have less dependencies. The amount of dependencies that you see flowing through Maven or Node.js, NPM, they should scare any CTO, because that is a headache. That is out of your control, things can change, and you have to readapt everything. So either you grow up an army of people that are coding, which is not really easy, because everyone I hear around, everyone is looking for developers, or I don't know, or you fail because someone changed something in a hobby project that you're relying on your stack. So minimalism is an important pattern. And I'm pointing out this talk because my friend Katolat's much better than me at giving a talk on minimalism, given and was recorded. So you can look up this on YouTube, Minimalism in Software Design, Dev 1, I don't know, look, yeah, this link. It's a fantastic talk. He starts from architecture, a modernist architecture. So it's like, he will get there to tech. He also gives an homage to a community that is based also here in Germany, which is Suckless, the community of people that make software that sucks less, because it has less, in general, what I mentioned as algorithmic sovereignty was the very topic of my PhD dissertation is the fact that people can control what is creating an incentive, what is creating an architecture of incentives, of things that you want to do. So, example, Pokemon Go just created an incentive for kids to go over to cross rails and dangerous places. It was not really mapped to a geography that was accessible, and it created a danger. The mayor of New York, of Amsterdam, they had to issue a warning to the police because when this was released, because some weird things were happening with kids walking around. So, besides imagining in a science fiction scenario, in a dystopic scenario, that one could drive a cyber attack to a whole population by developing a game that creates incentives, particular incentives that would be nihilistic for the very existence of us people into that context, which is a dystopian scenario. I'm not sure someone wrote what I would like to point out is that it's important that we give people, especially the communities that are adopting, some sort of control, some sort of channel of communication to the makers. Because I believe we are not just developers and users, we have also to see us all as participants into the things we do. Another thing that I like to point out as food for thought, then I will leave some, I'm really looking forward to your reactions as well, is another angle to see what is happening. Let's think about the tech that we are developing and this simple question. Are we developing tech for machines to perceive us, which I argue most of the ICT industry is doing right now? Or are we developing tech for people to understand machines, which I argue is most of what we want, from the privacy movements to the blockchain movements. I believe that what we are trying to do is also in the dimension of understanding why something is there, having an history of it, having a verifiability, having a trust that is not just given by an AI that is too deep to debug once the result is wrong. So I believe it's useful to place ourselves on this very simple duality. Pardon the fact it's just two poles. There might be more probably, but it's just where you place yourself. And yeah, thinking of this, I present you like my shot at a solution, which was a very inspiring work in the last 4 years and quite successful, I must say, which is also touching the other project that was presented here yesterday about the language Lexon. That was presented here. So I very much agree with the author of Lexon, who was so kind to gift me a book, to the extent in which he describes the importance of human language and access. So this is my point. We need, at this point in time, we need to really overcome the technocracy that is forming around access to technology, because this will create a very dangerous situation in which people who do not trust technology are confined into a sort of primitivist space that will make their life a pity. Because technology, you know, being a primitivist is not really my thing, has never been, but you know, you also need to handhold people into what technology can do for them, and therefore they need to understand it. And so the interventional language is very important. I will save you the theoretical part of it. My main reference is a great researcher in governance, Saskia Sassen, who already in the 80s wrote that the whole space for also public sector governance misses a vocabulary that can describe the cybernetic processes in place. So we even miss a language to describe and to talk. So basically it means that in a government that adopts also in big societies, also like structured organizations that adopt technology, often we have sort of kip zonder kop, as we say in Netherlands, chicken without a head, or the head is just in another room, and, you know, like the politicians are saying something and then something else happens. And yeah, this is just, I would say, schizophrenia on a societal scale. So down to the technical thing. This is just a proposition of one more thing that can work. It's production ready, it's 2.0 released, and it's a DSL. And rather than shield you my project, I will try to go through the design patterns because I think they are useful. A DSL is a domain-specific language. And keep in mind this definition. Domain-specific is very important, not only for tech, but people that have a domain-specific knowledge of something. They are the ones that can give us requirements as developers. They are the ones that have wisdom. So, you know, most developers, we are like very sarcastic about salespeople because, yeah, what do you do in your life? You drink coffees and beers with people. But salespeople often have domain-specific knowledge of certain parts of society and economy that will never get you anywhere if you don't have, because you don't know how to move in that labyrinth. You don't know who is who. So if you reject that sort of knowledge, you are just a fool. If you manage to link it closer to the tech, then you win. And that's how we won. And I will explain you. This VM, you can look it up, Jarom.org, is written in C. I went back from C++. Actually, the Bitcoin code really convinced me to go back to C because when I read it back at the beginning. But yeah, it's written in C99. It's very portable. It's a payload of 2 megabytes. And it runs in 2 megabytes of RAM. So it's also ported to Cortex chips, and it compiles to WASM. Interesting enough, if you do npm install Jarom, you will get the package fully working and with 0 dependencies. So it's an npm package with 0 dependencies that can do elliptic curve encryption, zero knowledge proof, and what not. I mean, we have several zero knowledge proof implementations, and it's coded like this, more or less. This is an old slide, but it gives you the gist of the type of code. The code reflects, it's a different design than the Lexus one. It's deeply different. It's inspired to the Cucumber, also called behavioral-driven development, existing in Ruby as an implementation called Gherkin. And this language was made for people that can't code but need to develop test units. So it's used at scale in the industry to develop test units to software so that you can do conditions. You can see it, if you have a background in languages, as a prologue, sort of. Like it processes every line, and if the line is not true, it aborts and reports your error. So there is only branching, if and if, but that's all. It's non-Turing complete. Therefore, is very robust. Of course, it's designed for blockchain, so this is an interpreter that is ready to accept any code without exploding. So, but analyzing it and giving the error if it's not. And this is like a simple flow. And yeah, if you're curious about it more, like I don't want to walk you through it. I think the tech is best explored in your own space. How do I move this? Here.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Why C as opposed to, say, Rust?
Well, when I started this, Rust was not mature enough. Actually, I think it's still not, because it's not 1.0, so it's changing. It's a lot in flux. I like Rust, but C I know better, so I code C since more than 20 years. I just... Huh?
Rust is 1.0.
Since when?
4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Really? Okay, yeah, when I started, I looked, it was like some 0.9.
I made the exact same choice for purchase, but my choice was 12.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're daring. I'm a little bit more conservative on my choice. But also, sincerely, I knew it better. And we have a Rust binding, so you can put it in Rust. And other than that, I have nothing against having it in Rust. We work with a company that has re-implemented in Rust in Austria, and now we're working on merging the implementations on the same language specification. I think Rust is a good thing, so I don't have a reason to say I didn't wrote it in Rust. I'm not going to rewrite it in Rust because I think that's unhealthy when a developer comes and says, let's rewrite it in Rust. Yeah, I could have wrote it in Rust because Rust also compiles to WASM. One big point was compiling this to WASM so that we can do end-to-end encryption. And if you go on the website apirum.net, I give you an example of this. You can already run examples. This is the code to generate a key pair. And play, you can check that it runs actually in your browser. So you can open the developer tools and see, and it spits out the public and private key in a JSON, and you have examples for a lot more things. We are integrating with Ethereum and Bitcoin, so it can generate raw transactions inside. We have signature, typical signature stuff. It's not exactly super easy for someone that doesn't know logics and programming. But you know what really this serves us for? Yeah, here you can, we have a private blockchain, for example, an Hyperledger showroom, and this is like code to store something on a blockchain. It's like this, and it runs. So I can tell you many episodes that I had into doing this that really facilitated my work as a CTO is when you have teams working on different parts of the software, client, server, the web, and you use different libraries, you have weird stuff. We had like weird stuff like hashes being different from Python 2 to Python 3 or something like that. We wrote a blog post about it. So you have, when you change languages, you have misalignment, and that takes a lot of time because usually the teams are different, so you have to make them talk to each other. It creates an incredible overhead of communication. So with this, we have cryptographers working in parallel because behind the crypto is made in Lua, I forgot to mention, as a direct syntax parser. Very solid direct syntax parser. Think of it as the scripting language of World of Warcraft. And imagine how many script kiddies try to hack that. It's like my same point why Bitcoin is wonderful. It's like imagine how many people try to break it. And it's still there. So yeah, you write something that is similar to Mathematica and then you implement it into these statements. Zero knowledge proof flow, secret sharing, Lagrange based, multi-signature, and yeah, we use this a lot. But what is, then you can imagine the flow. Here you build your own contract, then you save it. You have here your contracts. I'm not connected here. I'll connect. So you save your contracts. I want to show you the flow and then make you understand why it's cool to develop things that enable people very much. Yeah, here I have my contracts that I saved before. So the keygen that you just saw, that's my colleague that wants to talk to me, or to any one of you. Yeah, here I saved a keygen. Then I put it on, and directly on our web server, you have a link of the same thing that was running in your browser, running as an API on your user API point here. But that's centralized because it's on our server, so it sucks. Therefore, you can export what you just did to a Docker file and run it on your own. So this thing enables people to build a microservice with complex logics, immediately download it as a Docker file, shoot it on Kubernetes, and this sort of stuff. We are integrating this. We are planning to integrate this within also academic environments where people don't know how to code but still know the business logic. What is very much fun is working with people that don't know how to code but have a lot of this domain knowledge, and they know how the business logic goes, but talking to a developer will be a lot of time and effort, and we manage to coach them to write their own business logic. We have contracts, rather big contracts, made by people, for instance, with projects like energy grid, like you produce more energy, you want to sell it back to the grid. So Alex, the person that runs Prosume, the company, he has done 10 years of research in Europe for all the contracts that you need to have with grid owners across different nations to apply percentages of this operation of selling back. And it's like an enormous amount of data. He has Excel sheets. He's not a programmer, and for a programmer to apply all that knowledge will take a lot of time. Then to verify that it's really true, because you have money running on there, you have liabilities, so it's a lot of work. We manage Alex to code, to have Alex coding his own Zen code and deploy it on, actually this is deployed on smart meters, because it runs on a small chip. The ARM lab of Taiwan has contributed a port also to Cortex-M. They contacted us, very nice guys, and they ported it to the main platform on the Cortex. So it runs on the chips, and it's all in this browser. So yeah, in the last workshop that I made, it was very much fun. I made this tarot thing. Give it a list of tarots, and about predicting the future. I found some list online, JSON list of tarots, created the first, probably, or correct me if I'm wrong, first random, cryptographic random strong generator of tarots. And then someone from the workshop made this website, which just matches them to the API that is spitting out the random. Beware that this is all in JavaScript running in your browser, so the tarots that you see are those of your computer, and you are reading your computer future, not your own. Back to who perceives who. So that's all. I welcome your intervention and all your dissent on what I say. Please criticize. I think our community is great for that. Cheers.
Hi,
Thomas.
Thank you very much. You had a slide about machines learning from people, or people learning from machines. Yeah. I don't remember exactly how you put it, but yeah, that's this. And so very nice talk, by the way. At the beginning, you also mentioned the acquisition of Red Hat by IBM for an outrageous price. I would not have paid that much. But much more relevant to this is the acquisition of GitHub by Microsoft. I'm a former researcher in machine learning, and I think that with GitHub, what they have is access to a gigantic database on which they can train algorithms, not to replace programmers, but to build tools that are going to be very efficient at helping programmers. And in a way, I'm wondering why you did not mention, why you chose the IBM example instead of GitHub. I mean, maybe it's not really a question, but maybe you can take this as a remark, as an improvement, because the acquisition of GitHub is really something for me that is targeted as machines, understanding people.
You're right, Thomas. I could explore that way. One reason is that I am less of an expert in AI and machine learning. I don't have so much experience, so I don't know what I would say about that, if it's really true. But if you say it, I saw some VS Code extensions that start helping people, the beta proposal. From a labor perspective, as developers, we could worry. But again, I'm not so afraid from a labor perspective of that coming up, because it's another sort of change in the economic scheme. And I think the winners will be still those who can communicate between disciplines.
Yes, again, repeating the thank you for the talk. It's really eye-opening and disturbing. One of the disturbing things, of course, is you point out how we are controlled. You mentioned the Pokemon I don't know if this is a question or a statement or a concern. You're no doubt aware that Pokemon was banned or banned in China. Do you know why? No. Because it's a military program. The Pokemon system is a remote surveillance system from the U.S. through Nintendo, through the Japanese machine. And the Chinese government, or the Chinese military, said, that's not happening here. We're not sending kids across railroad tracks to photograph the bridges. We're not doing that. And we're not allowing it to happen. So this is very interesting, I think, to me, that you're pointing out from a European standpoint that, you know, the people were concerned about their children being put into danger. Well, this is more nefarious than that. It's even deeper than that. Yeah, this whole effort of the controlling nations and militaries and cyber war efforts, how can we, I mean, we're all in the area of building a parallel society which is free and not completely under the domination and control of those who would control us through these kinds of things. So how, I imagine this is what you're presenting here through the Zen.
But your question is a bit deeper. It's like how to counteract the cyber warfare.
Well, obviously we can't fight them. This is clear. And then with the AI question as well, we're not fighting them with AI. But benevolent AI, if we're training it, and if it is training based on in our project Conscience Land, we're talking about solving the SDGs using benevolent AI. Why? Because the current AI, the MIC AI, the Military Industrial Complex AI, clearly it will not do it. They're the exact opposite objective.
They follow just a profit line, actually.
Precisely.
They are
and
quite fools in that.
So, you know, I think we're pretty much all in agreement on this. However, are we supported? I mean, how do we program these systems so that they are decentralized, so that they are serving the community and not serving them, our overlords?
I believe, okay, this is a community process. You can see AIs, you can see, no, I don't want to make like really this parallel, but I'm making it, you can see an AI or a new person in a community that doesn't know much and starts processing the information as it comes, but doesn't know really who is who or the semantics of the community. So we have a similar situation, because you mentioned, very interesting, how we avoid the cyber warfare scenario. So I like to think that communities are organisms and can produce sense for the outside and for the inside. And it is our job as a hacker community to produce sense for the inside that brings peace. And in this I quote Wow Holland, that here in Germany many of us remember as the founder of the Chaos Computer Club, that really wrote a heavy piece on cyber peace that was criticized. At that time, he was criticizing the action of some hacker groups disrupting cyber infrastructure in the US, or thinking about it. You know, there was a big debate on Cult of the Dead Cow and Loft. And he wrote a manifesto that is little known and hard to find on the internet, which was called Cyber Peace. And it was talking to our own peers, saying, guys, what's the fun in destructing stuff and making it dangerous? This is the level of education and culture that we need to build, but in an organic way within our communities. So how do we fight cyber war in AI in the community? With cyber peace, with a notion of cyber peace and with a notion of peace that really is valuable. Imagine how well we know it in Europe. We had wars just like not so far ago, and you know, it's not such an easy process to make different nations agree and be friendly. We have a lot of stereotypes and fights. So when you have been through a war, I believe you can understand also much better how peace is valuable.
And what we call weapon of mass inclusion. Not weapon of mass destruction, the weapon of mass inclusion, which is these communities, which is this access to the same tools as Cambridge Analytica uses. The same tools, except used for peace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Wow.
Access. Thanks.
Thank you so much
Thank you
for
very
your
much.
presentation. And
Cheers.
yes.
If you like to follow up and contact, these are some of the channels that we are on. Thanks.